Perfect. Welcome, welcome, welcome everybody back to the Awakened Being channel. And Monique, what is your channel called?
I'm Monique Hill, Intuitive Soul Savant.
And today we are going to be talking. Welcome, welcome, welcome everybody back to the Awakened Being channel. And Monique, what is your channel called? There we go.
Intuitive Soul Savant. Monique Hill. I'm from Australia. Good morning from Australia.
So in Australia, it's the 22nd, and in Canada, it's the 21st.
That's correct. We get to see the sun a lot more hours than you guys, but we've still got New Zealand, who's 2 hours ahead of us. Yes. So,
okay. Yeah. And today we are talking about grief. We thought it was a really great idea to talk about grief, especially around the holidays, because this is a really trying time for a lot of people. And grief is one of those things that, it can really creep up on you and catch you off guard and keep you just not thriving. First of all, I want to just do a disclaimer. Neither one of us are licensed psychologists or psychiatrists. The information that we're sharing here is just experience that we've had in our own lives and helping, supporting others going through what they're going through. So this is all just personal experience, okay? And that's, I think, what we, yeah. How do you want to start?
Oh, thanks, Linda. Well, firstly, I'd like to, my grief experience has been more from losses in life, but not I haven't had many people pass over in my life. So I haven't had to experience that depth of grief, but I have lost everybody, family, son, my company, my health. I've lost everything in the last dozen years. So that grief, and also because of that, I went full on into doing the inner child work and dredging up, you could say, the grief from childhood. So in this life, in the last dozen years, I have experienced and felt and moved the energy through my body with many different tools to be able to release that grief from my somatic body. So yeah, so that's my experience with grief. And there's one line that really helped me, and because I'd suffered from depression all my life, this one line in this group that I worked with was depression is unexpressed grief. So that makes sense when we're feeling grief, but not everybody out there may know that when they're depressed, underneath that energy is a deep grief. So it is hard to get to. It's unless the body and the energies and work that you're doing on yourself allows you to release that.
Absolutely. And so my experience with grief, I did lose my dad, and I don't know if a lot of people know the story. I've been sharing it a lot lately. I only met my dad late in life. I met him at 22, and he passed away. I was 36. So I got 14 years with him. They were really beautiful, wonderful years. And I stayed with him for the 6 weeks during his process of crossing over. And that was, it wasn't so much going through that experience that I really experienced the grief. It was after. So when I got back to my regular life and, every time just getting used to life with that significant person was really, it created a lot of grief. I've also experienced the grief of losing a huge part of your identity through a loss that way. Like, I lost my business, I lost, significant friends along the way, and even, having struggles with family members. And those are all things that can create such deep sadness, that the sadness becomes so intense that it then gets called grief. And it lasts for a really long time sometimes.
And can be overwhelming and can be
extremely overwhelming.
Extremely. And I guess the level of grief depends on the codependency, how much we've depended on that person, place, or thing to act as a prop to our confidence and our identity in life. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's why we have family and friends and what have you, so we can lean on them. However, when they leave our life, the level of our grief and our comeback and our process of that grief would have something to do with our dependence on that person, place, or thing. So that's something that we could keep in mind without bagging out anybody that is going through extreme grief, because there is processes to grief, isn't there? There's stages to grief.
So there's the 7 stages of grief, and I think that many, it depends on where you look. I think that many people label it different ways, but the 7 stages of grief that I've come across is the shock and denial is number 1, stage number 1, pain and grief, stage number 2, stages 3 is the anger and the bargaining. The stage number 4 is the depression. So that's when the loneliness really starts to set in, the magnitude of the loss that you experienced. And then in stage 5, we're starting to see a change. We're starting to kind of coming out of it a little bit, just kind of rebuilding a strength. Stage 6 is working through it. And then stage 7 is the acceptance and then the hope. And like, this is a rebuilding, going back into the world again and having the confidence to build again in the world, right?
And that's a huge process. That's a huge process, a huge circle to get from the first loss to the rebuild and the confidence again, and the faith and the trust. And then with that, the acceptance of the loss. The one word denial came up to me. That denial, I'd like to sort of have a look at that denial, because I think I'm in denial that I was in denial. No. I'm just interested how that would manifest, that the denial of the grief. Is that more on a repressing?
Well, the denial, I think sometimes is like, say it's a relationship that's been lost, right? It could be a denial of your part that you played, a denial of, how the situation played out, denial of the pain or grief, like this isn't bothering me, when deep down it really is.
And the denial of the process that is ahead of you, so to speak. So if the loss is losing somebody who's dysfunctional in your life, who you're in denial that person needs to leave your life because of the grief that would be associated with that codependency.
Absolutely. The other thing that I want to talk about too is the shock part. So the shock part, when anything that shocks the central nervous system or your mind, and I actually posted a very quick little clip on this last week, it's overwhelming. So when your mind becomes overwhelmed, there's one of 2 ways it reacts to this. It either shuts down, and it's like you can't process anything, nothing. It's like, hello, is anybody home? Or you go to the other end and you overanalyze everything.
Wow.
right? So this is, this overwhelming shock of these experiences that we have. The mind is just trying to grapple at how to cope with these moments. And this shutdown or overanalyze, is that fight or flight, or is it the freeze or fight that goes along with it? And sometimes that can last for a long time.
Yes, I witnessed to that. That's been my experience. Another point that came up for me was getting lost in the grief, like getting caught up in the grief. So the grief is just getting over, process. And when when I became aware of just that, am I getting lost in this grief? Because our emotional body has this addictive tendency to run these feelings over and over and over. So after the due time that the grief should have been processed, I questioned myself, am I sitting in this? Am I enjoying this? Because I'd had a life of grief and loss and disappointment. I was used to that energy. I was used to being in that state. So it's very deep, the many aspects that come with grief.
Oh man, there's so much about, the vulnerability of the sadness, right? That's the other, that I feel is really entwined into that shock, because you're just not able to work through anything at that point, right? So it makes you extremely vulnerable. That's one thing that I found. I had a concussion after a car accident, which changed my entire world. And that feeling of vulnerability, of like how easy it was, that shock of it, how easy it was for my whole world to get flipped right upside down on top of itself. That it was like, the vulnerability that I felt really fed into that grief part, because it was like, okay, like I understand you get into a car accident, you hurt yourself. It's just that, wow, I got into a car accident and I hurt myself. And I walked away. I didn't think I was hurt, and it was only when I went back to my life that I was like, okay, something's wrong here. Something's not right. I couldn't process. It was either I was over analyzing, so overreacting, or there was nothing, like nobody's home. And
Wow.
yeah, and it was a very vulnerable space to be in. And that lasted for a good 2 or 3 months, just that feeling of vulnerability that, you can't walk around in a bubble.
No, very true. And also the awareness, like, because we've been through what we've been through, we have a level of compassion for others on board that would go through that same experience. And empathy, compassion, putting ourselves into another person's shoes. Well, that seems to be very easy to do when you've been through that experience. But true compassion comes from having the compassion of somebody grieving, having somebody who's in grief. So that vulnerability, I very much understand. Yours with the car accident, but even having your whole life turned upside down, everything's gone, and you're just left on your own. There's that vulnerability of how, takes a special group of friends and tribe to be able to support somebody through that. And I was very aware of that vulnerability. However, I saw it from the ego's perspective as a little embarrassment because of that vulnerability, that vulnerable state that I was in. And I was very aware of, how are people going to understand this? I don't even get this. This is just far out. One day I'm a mother and a company director, in a beautiful home. And the next day, not the next day, but, the next year or a couple of years, I'm homeless. I mean, how does that happen in an individual's life when they're on their own? we've had, we've had fires here in Australia and floods. There's whole communities that have lost everything. And, the nation pulls together to help those people. And there's this huge compassion. Oh, the poor souls, they've lost everything. Wow, that'd be terrible. And, they're in loss for a couple of years. These fires go way back. People still living in caravans and what have you. But life has gone on for others. So, when it happens to just you, the self, there isn't that nation that are pulling together, even though your grief is just as important as, a weather disasters grief, people that are caught up in weather disasters. So that's another thing that I became aware of, which triggered that part of myself, the victim. Oh, where was everybody when I had lost everything? It was only last week there was something that had come across about, getting money together for this community and that community and what have you. And I just sat and thought, wow, I had to go through all that on my own. Because the story is the story. Whatever happens, whether it's a car accident, fire, flood, business losses, GFC, family issues, whatever loss it is, that's just the story, isn't it? It's
really interesting, because I like how, that's the loneliness part, that you're alone in dealing with what you're going through. And I understand it's a very lonely experience going through that. But even those people who have a huge community, they go through that lonely feeling too. Because nothing can get in, I don't think. When you're in that space, even though people are there helping you and all of that stuff, like I say that not because I've had different experiences of grief and loneliness, of course. I think that just goes par with this experience. But I watched my aunt. She lost, her and her husband were together for 40 years. They were together since she was 14 years old. She didn't know life without him. And so when he passed away, and it was a very sudden boom, he's gone. It was, I watched her. She went to that lonely place, even though there was a lot of support there. But she had to. That's part of it.
It is part of it, because that's the reflection upon the soul self. And all of this whole podcast today, the underlining message here is that we are on this journey, and the grief, the loss, it all strengthens us. It strengthens us.
I can honestly tell you with full authority over my own grief experiences that the darker I have gone through, the darker places that I have gone through have brought me closer to the light every single time. And there are tools that I use now that help me a lot, but I didn't always have those tools, and sometimes that grief and that depression would last for a long time. And there's really not too many people, or books for that matter, that could give me the tools that I possess today.
That's right. Yeah, I was lucky to find a support group. And that, I think, was the major part of the healing, was sharing that grief with like-minded others who had also experienced that grief. I'm talking about family dysfunctional grief. And when that grief from childhood is ready, I say is ready because I don't think it can be forced up and out of you. There is work that we can do to trigger these memories and what have you, but you need to be in that mindset. And I believe that your soul self, higher self, has led you down that path. It's not something you watch this video and go, right, I'm going to go and clean up all the grief in my life. I think it's a plan of the soul and the ego self right, we're ready to move this. How do we start moving this grief? Well, let's take all the distractions off them, shall we? I mean, I'm just, there's nobody out there doing that, but there's no puppeteer. But yeah, that's otherwise we're too busy on planet to sit and process grief. So our losses are actually our beautiful gates to heaven, you could say. Absolutely. We walk through the door of loss into the grief. And I guess I've made a video last week about feelings, spontaneous feelings, and the somatic body. So with grief, there's just these feelings that keep coming up that you, even to distract yourself, once you're ready, once you're there and you're on that healing path of past grief, or even grief that's just happened. But I think you're right. I think in case of a car accident or a sudden death of a relative, partner, child, there is that process. It's not right, bang, let's go process this grief now. It's the stages that you read out to get to that point. And along those stages, okay, we're going to process this grief through. At first there's the denial, the shock, the aloneness, all of that before we can get to that place of acceptance of the grief. Right, I'm going to move this through my body. I'm going to allow it to move through my body. We're not actually doing anything to move it through the body, but I'm going to allow it. I'm going to accept it. I'm going to allow space. And I'm just going to damn cry every day if that's what it takes until it's done itself, because it seems to have a mind of its own and an agenda of its own. So, when people go through their childhood grief or what happened, it can be a couple of years. I mean, we stuffed our feelings down for decades. So, it can take a while.
Yeah. And that's the thing too, that we don't recognize is when we're going through, like, yes, again, we're having this conversation and you're you right now and I'm me right now, but we are also everything that we've, like, every single part of ourselves that experienced life. So you're the 1-year-old, 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old, 6-year-old. So all of those parts of you is actually experiencing this grief at the same time. So what happens here is you have, like, if there's a lot of grief or feelings in your childhood that were not processed, those feelings are going to come to the surface, because that's the only way that part of you knows how to react to the situation. And there can be layers and layers and layers and layers of this. That's why grief can take so long, because we have to go back to those, more vulnerable parts of ourselves and hold them and love them and tell them it's all going to be okay. And that, forgiveness is a huge part of it, and atonement, and seeing the situation for the innocence in it, and all of those aspects are so powerful that it builds a foundation on how to deal with the grief, how to, but grief is the only thing that can teach you how to deal with grief.
That is true. That is true. It's a whole mechanical system on its own, isn't it? And I was just thinking, whether it's you've lost a business, in my case, the GFC, or you lost a business because a partner has duped you, a business partner has duped you. After, the victimhood, there's a space for the victim mentality, because the mind does want to go there. Poor me. Why has this happened to me? I didn't do anything wrong. I'm a good person. I've worked hard. I don't deserve this, blah, 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 says the victim. However, in hindsight, when I look back, I could have saved my company. There were certain parts of my personality that needed to learn through the loss and the grief that I would not do in my next company. Do you know what I mean? I wouldn't repeat some of the ways that I ran that company, and as a mother as well. You know, so our losses, they're not you know, they don't happen to us. You have to excuse me, everybody. My words are hard to find with Mercury going retrograde in Capricorn. Oh dear, it's hard to grab some words. Yeah, there's experiences that I wouldn't have repeated in hindsight now. So, you know, there is a big lesson in it all. That yes, we want to blame the world and blame outside of ourselves. However, after we've gone through the processes, the lesson is there that we can reflect on and go, oh, you know, I did have a part in it, because, you know, if I'd have done this, or if I'd have done that, I would have been able to avoid what happened. So there's the lesson.
Yes.
There's the lesson there, taking responsibility for what happened, because nothing's random. There's deep truth and deep lesson for ourselves, our personal journey and our soul's journey, in every loss that we experience. Yeah, I mean, even addictions, you know, it's common knowledge that even if you were a cigarette smoker and you gave up, you're going to grieve your best friend a cigarette. That's what's made you feel safe for so long. And I guess our losses, you know, it reflects how safe we feel as a human being on this planet, and how connected we are with Mother Gaia, because that really is our true source of power and energy. And yet we still have to associate with each other and love each other and rely on each other and be interdependent on each other.
And that's, you know, they talk about in A Course of Miracles that no one has done the mission here until everybody is moving in light. Right? So it's no man gets left behind.
No, that's right. We're one. We're a one system here.
That's right.
We're a one system here. And I think this is a really important topic, grief, because the inner child work, the shadow work, is very much building with many individuals. You work with people, I work with people, moving this grief through their body. I mean, I have an acquaintance here in my local town, and she lost her mother this year, and apparently she hasn't even cried.
Wow. That's
okay.
And you know, that's something that I hear people talk about. Not that there's no judgment.
No, not at all. Not at all.
If you have had a significant loss and you don't have an emotional reaction to it, maybe you just are really easily, because I don't find, like, when I lost my dad, of course I was grieving it, but I don't find it was something that stayed with me as long as losing an identity. Right? Because I knew that my dad wanted to go. He wanted to cross over. He wanted me to celebrate that for him. He wanted me to, you know, support him in that mission. And, you know, of course I miss him, but I can call on his energy whenever I want to. So I feel a very close affinity to him at times that, you know, it really helped the grieving process through that. So there's no judgment. If somebody has lost somebody significant and they don't feel that, I hear so many people say that, I just don't feel it, you know.
It's
and
not time.
It could be time. It could be
yeah,
time.
but well, next year Pluto will be transiting into her sun sign, and Pluto is the dredger. So it hasn't happened this year, you know, but I'm sure that grief of the loss will, you know, wave on down in the next few years, and I'll be there as a somatic healer to help that along. I think, you know, the more we mature spiritually, the easier losing somebody will be. Because when we get to understand that there is no life or death, there's just a new chapter. Intellectually, we need to, intellectually, we know that. We read that, we see that. But on a cellular level, just allowing someone to pass over, allowing them to do that, and knowing that you're okay with or without them in body here on planet. And that's knowledge, intellectual knowledge to start with. But then it becomes wisdom. It becomes an understanding. And many countries like Bali, when their families and what have you pass over, there's no sadness. No sadness is allowed. It's a joyful experience. It's a party.
Which that's what it should be, right?
Yes, they're rejoicing for this. They're allowing that soul to leave the planet in joy. You know, when I was younger, I was very aware that it was I thought, this is just personal, I'm not saying this to everybody, but you may identify as a listener. I was very aware that if I lost somebody through their passing, my grief was all about me and my selfishness, you could say. Oh, I'm not going to have them here with me anymore. It was not about them. And that was an interesting awareness to have. So, you know, if somebody has passed and others are reacting emotionally, there's no judgment, of course, because they may have that philosophy that this is a joyful time, not a sad time, and I'm not going to grieve because I'm missing out here on somebody else's energy. Oh, it's a bit.
So the other thing that I wanted to talk about too was anger, because I find that anger is the reaction when we have these more vulnerable experiences that happen to us and we have these more vulnerable feelings. It doesn't take much to trigger us into anger. And this, it really has to do with trying to protect those more vulnerable places, right? So when we're lashing out and then guilt comes along with that, you know, there's a whole, you know, few layers of these darker reactions that we have. And really, really important, extremely important to allow yourself the grace. Allow yourself to just forgive yourself for those things, forgive others for whatever it is that's happening. If it's God, forgive God. But the self-forgiveness is so powerful for allowing us to just be who we are and react the way we need to for that given moment. You know, because there's just so many feelings of overwhelm that we just don't know how to handle. And if somebody puts another thing on your plate when you're like that, it just doesn't sit well.
No, it doesn't. And right in the forefront is I can't control. I don't have control here. That infuriates me, that I don't have control here. I cannot fix this. You know, I cannot fix this situation. And we've been raised to believe that we can fix everything.
Yeah.
You know, so the more we become aware of our lack of control, our vulnerability, our self-compassion, then the more experience we'll become, I believe, of moving through loss, aloneness, and the grief. I think it's our lack of control. In a suicide event, what could I have done?
Oh my gosh.
To stop that person taking their own life? And that's another level of grief altogether.
Yeah.
The survivor syndrome.
Yeah.
I think allowing, the hardest thing to release grief for me was I had to give myself permission to do this, because it's not something that was passed down through my family or taught at school, that grief is a normal part of life. Waking up crying is just normal as waking up laughing. It is a part of our life that we need to embrace and honour and be grateful that we can experience that on planet Earth. So
it is one of the very big benefits that we have to being human, but not everybody looks at it like it's a benefit.
That's right. We weren't shown that or taught that as we were growing up. Wasn't part of our system,
Yeah.
family systems.
There's also expectations that we have that have been given to us along our line too, that gives us this idea that we should be further ahead in our grief than we are, or that, sometimes the grief comes from these high expectations that we have over the circumstances in our life and ourselves. And that when we don't meet those expectations, or when those expectations let us down in some way, then this deep, deep, deep disappointment leads to this very intense sadness and grief.
That's right. I mean, if you'd had a charmed life and you didn't really have the opportunity to have to process so much emotional energy, and you arrived at midlife, 40, 44, 42 to 44, and just your whole world fell apart. I mean, that is huge.
Truly is.
As compared to somebody who grew up in a family with illnesses and loss and drama and an ongoing life where it was just, another thing. If that was to happen, it's like, oh, well, here's another thing. So I think the less grief that you've experienced, it would be that more shocking to the system, until you got into the swing of, okay, right, I accept this now, and I'm ready to work with it and process it and feel it and allow it and have compassion for it. And I guess as individuals, that word compassion, should we have to go through something to be able to have compassion for another person?
It's an unfortunate thing, but I really believe, honestly, that the people who have lost them, like a parent very young, or a sibling, people who in life have suffered deep loss, they are the ones that are able to hold the space necessary to allow somebody to say and go to the depth that they need to really get it out. Because ultimately, in the grand scheme of things, being heard is one of the biggest healing aspects. And not everybody is able to hold the space and allow somebody to just go there.
That's very true, because somebody's grief can trigger your own grief and your own vulnerability as a human being. And not everybody's ready to look at that part of themselves. You're right. And it's if we want to look at this is a beautiful thing, because this gives every human an opportunity to help teach and heal another human being from their experience. And there is the wounded healer archetype right there. So, but in saying that, with the floods here and the fires, I didn't need to have a fire or a flood. I just had extreme loss of all my property and everything that I identified with. So I remember that compassion for those people who have been in a weather disaster. So I think once we mature through our grief, we can have compassion for any situation that any human being is going through, related to loss. And I believe that's a superhuman being. So there's another payoff for having to experience deep, deep grief and loss in life. If you've lost your mother as a child, that is a little bit different to me. I have compassion for everybody. However, I can't identify with that. However, somebody else who's lost their parent at a young age would easily identify. So I guess as a tool for any listeners that are going through deep, deep grief is find others. Find others who can hold the space and allow you, because yes, we need to feel this grief, but we all also need to speak it, because it needs to come through this fifth chakra. And that's where it can get stuck.
That's right.
Is in the fifth chakra. And so the speaking therapy is just as important as the feeling therapy.
That's right. And you know what? It's also recognizing that if somebody is not able to listen and it's somebody that's important to you, that they're not able to hold the space for you to get it out, there's nothing wrong with you. It's not your fault. It's, some people just can't, but there's many that can. You just need to find that support group to help you. Because, sometimes I found myself, trying to share with people that I just want to talk to that person. I love that person. I've always had this really nice feeling. And then you start talking to them and they're like, no, I got to go, or no, I did. And then they just kind of ghost you for a long time. And that's been a huge aha for me, to be able to say, okay, that person is just not, and maybe it does trigger their grief, but maybe they've just not had that grief, so that they can't, it's almost like as they're seeing it, they're like, whoa, that's a lot. And that's it for them. And they just can't do it.
It's not safe for you to turn to that type. So you need discernment. You need discernment in who you're ready to share that with. And there's so many support groups out there. I believe there's even grief support groups that operate for people. I mean, a lot of people losing their partners. That's huge.
It is huge.
That is huge, and that's forever in the front of my mind. I haven't married, but even when I was younger, I was very aware that, wow, when you commit to a marriage, that would need to be back of mind as a reality, not as denial, that, wow, this person may go before me, they may pass before me. For me personally, I like that awareness. I like to have that awareness to remind myself that that's ever present. That's a possibility. That happens. And will I be strong enough as a self, an individual, to get through that and to not lose my life, because it's a common thing. A broken heart can kill people. Like, a broken heart can actually be very devastating. And then the elderly couples, one partner passes and a year later, 2 years later, the other partner passes, because they can't imagine living this life as a single individual. And that we are very vulnerable. That's warmed my heart, just though that statement is where our vulnerability, owning our vulnerability, and grief is our vulnerability. However, that's not the face we show to the world.
The other thing that I wanted to talk about was depression, because I find that a lot of people will call grief depression. And it's like, depression is when the emotions, so there's two different, in my experience, there's two different types of depression. There's emotion overload, That's when you have so many emotions firing for so long that you're done. You're wiped. You can't go anymore. And it just, the whole system shuts right down.
Numb. Is that your numbness?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But you lose everything out of it. So that means like your passion, your go get it, go, like everything goes. So it's like you're a carcass and that's it. You don't have anything to give to the world. There's nothing.
Debilitation. So the grief has debilitated the self.
That's right. So the grief and all of these other emotions that go along with grief has just tapped out the system. We're done. You can't feel anything else. It's over. And then what usually happens is you're going between depression and then, oh, everything comes online for a little bit. Then we go back into depression again. So you're kind of flipping back and forth. And it's very difficult to operate like this.
Yeah, it is. And I guess the awareness needs to be on board, because I've always thought with my statement, depression is unexpressed grief. People who have suffered depression all their lives, the ones I've met, haven't actually gone and done any recovery work. So they call the depression, oh, I was born with depression.
Yeah.
So it was such a life-saving statement for me. Depression is unexpressed grief, because it was like, that's the reason I've been depressed all my life, because I've buried all of this grief through addictions and distractions so that I don't have to feel them. But, that had to be done. That work had to be done. My soul's journey required that work to be done. So the depression, if we can become aware that you weren't born depressed. I mean, you were born whole, right? So that's that layer. So you've got your grief and your depression, and then anger's in there as well, layer upon layer of the onion, as they say. And that depression, I guess, would be needed so that you didn't collapse yourself in grief, so that a little bit of grief's coming out, at a time. But after sort of going through this work, when people say they're depressed and they take medication for it, I'd love to just get them in front of me and let's start to see what's under that depression. And I think that's where the grief is under the depression. And the depression is a way to deal with the suppression of grief. Because it's I suffered depression for over 50 years. I don't have depression now because I did the 5-6 years of grieving, which took me to lose everything to have to do. So if we can help anybody out there to not have to go through lots and lots of loss, to recognize that there is grief on board. There's definitely grief on board. As children, we were disappointed. There's no perfect parents, and everybody's individual. What would worry you as a child may not worry or affect me or cause grief in me, because then we're going back to our soul's path, and there's a whole bunch of other issues that we may have brought in to heal and become aware of, because I believe awareness is healing in this life.
I love that.
Yeah, awareness being, as soon as you become aware of something, then it's up to you. It's up to your ego then. That it's up to you. You get a choice. You actually get a choice.
It's funny because I'm listening to an audiobook right now from Rhonda Burns. She's the the writer of The Secret. So the greatest secret is actually your awareness. So when they talk about if you're overthinking or you have emotions or there's pain, you keep asking yourself, am I aware? Am I aware? Am I aware? What do I need to be aware of? What am I aware? And that through asking that question, then the feelings will start to show themselves a little bit more. I also use this technique of, if you feel an emotion in your body and you connect it to the third eye and keep asking, what is the message here? What are you trying to teach me? What do you want me to know? Now, there's two different ways to receive messages here, because when you're asking that question, when you're asking the feelings that question, you're either going to hear your ego, hear your ego say, oh, you're nothing, you're a piece of blah, 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 whatever comes up. Or you're going to hear an inspired thought. And you want inspired thinking. Now, if the ego is coming forward, just put your pen to paper and let the ego just spew out whatever lies it wants to tell you until it's done, and then it will just start going into inspired thinking after that. But you just have to, and the other thing is, don't be identified by what your mind tells you about what the emotion is feeling, because there's so many different times in our timeline that if you're feeling an emotion of any kind, and maybe your parent was disciplining you because and it had a shame attached to it, that loops in your mind. So every time shame comes up, that loop, that voice starts to tell you the lie. And only by getting it down on paper, what is the source of this? Why is it here? And then allowing that inspired thinking to start coming in and saying, no, you know what? This happened because I needed to learn this. I needed to learn that. I needed to understand this about life. I needed to understand that about life, or that put me on a path to do what I'm doing here. So once you can start putting all of those puzzle pieces together, the emotion has no place anymore. It's delivered its message.
That's right. And that is our awakening. Our awakening, I believe, is us becoming aware that we're on Earth School. Mm-hmm. And the reason we chose to be here, apparently, is to be able to feel this beautiful depths of emotions and colors and experiences that we cannot feel in the or experience in the ethereal body. So by becoming awakened, we then have the opportunity to take responsibility for what we're going through, for our grief that we're experiencing, which will then take us away from the victim mentality, because, that was the first place I went to. Yeah. I have a lot of Pisces in my chart. It's a very Pisces Virgo energy, the victimization, the victimhood. I think that was my first place, was to victim. So therefore I'm not taking responsibility. It's like, this is all happening to me. This isn't mine. I'm not, I didn't do this to me. And then once I'd moved through that, then the real work could take place.
Yeah, that's a huge shift that I really am so happy that I've had that shift, that change in ideology that it's happening to me. For the simple fact that it has allowed me a type of growth in my world that I know it's leading to a place of thriving, and that's a really powerful place, and nothing can hold me back from that. Nothing, like nobody, no situation, nothing.
That's right.
And I feel like this last experience of like losing everything and having to start from scratch all over again was a really big, like, are you really want this? Do you really want to, help people? Do you really want this, and really doing that soul searching and saying, yeah, like, this is my path. It's been my path my whole life. I do know other skills, but I want to develop these skills. I want this.
Now, I guess where I'm at with the grief now is because repressed all feelings, all emotional feelings other than frustration, flight. I'd just run away, change the scenery. You know, what that deep, big loss and grief has left me is now every week, if not every fortnight, I can just start to weep a little. I can feel emotional energy. Nothing's happened, you know, nothing's happened in the space of my own sanctuary. And I now am practicing just allowing that to come up. Few tears, there's no reason, I don't have to put a story to it. I very much understand that it's like the bottom of the juice box, you know, just the last seems to be, you know, all the rest has been poured out, and there's still always going to be a few drops of condensation or what have you, you know, needing and wanting to be processed, you know. So without the shame, without the frustration of why am I crying? Nothing's happened. What are these tears? I very much had to learn in this lifetime, like many others, I'm sure, that tears and crying and releasing that energy is a wonderful thing to do. And I've had to learn that as an over 50-year-old. You know, I'm very passionate about us allowing our children to feel, you're having a cry, darling. Even in a household, you could have a little cry space, you know, rather than a naughty corner. You know, you could have a cry space, and make it all beautiful for your children, and pictures of children crying and smiling, or something like that, to teach this next generation, so that we can process this grief from the start as it happens. Let's process it. I'm sad. Mummy and Daddy won't let me do that. That's not how it was for me. And you know, not everybody's on board with that yet. But if we can allow our children to grieve the smallest things from the age that they can talk, you know, a baby's only crying because something's going on with them. You know, so I just think I'd love to see that in my lifetime, whether I will or not. But I think emotional energy really needs a place in the home. We need to have time. We need to teach our children the smallest of tears are important, and it's healthy for Bubba's body to do that. And, you know, it'll just save so much drama down the track. And then when we can all accept each other's grief, you know, my personal trainer, I'd go to the gym and we're doing weight work, and I'd just start crying. And God love him. He'd say, Monique, you know, I'm not good with tears. Oh my God, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say. And even with his own daughter, he's shutting her tears down. And so I'm speaking into his life as a young 30-year-old father, and with family, with girls, you know, I nearly said it's okay. You got to allow this, just hold the space. She doesn't want you to fix anything. There's no fixing, just sit and go, I accept what's coming out of you.
This is really an interesting point here, because I find that men have such a difficult time with emotion to begin with because of that programming. And, you know, grief for men is something that can sit with them for their whole life sometimes and never get it out or get to the bottom of it. And they just kind of learn to plow through, because I feel like that's what men are trained to do. You just plow through those things and keep, you know, getting the work done. And because men are very action strength oriented, that, you know, you just keep focusing on that and do the work and don't worry about the emotions. That, you know, they just don't have the understanding of how to allow that to come forward. And not all men, obviously. I've met several men that are very emotional.
But most men, because the saying was, real men don't cry.
Yeah, exactly. Mhm.
I don't know where that came from, but I heard it many, many times as a younger person.
Yeah.
Men don't cry, Monique. Oh, okay, which is gaslighting in a sense, because
Gaslighting at its
then
worst.
it's
Yeah.
gaslighting because then I'm growing up thinking that women are different and men, but we all have this emotional body on board.
That's right.
We all have this emotional body, and I think I don't hold me to this, but I'm pretty sure the statistics in Australia are that more men commit suicide than the women. And I bet you that this grief scenario is tied up in that, where the depression just gets that heavy. They don't have the license to grieve and cry like a baby,
Yeah.
like a little boy. The little boy within them is crying out for to be listened to be heard. I'm sad, I'm sad, I'm sad. And if we're not connected with that inner child, then it's depression.
Exactly.
It's depression. It's depression energy.
Yeah.
So this connection back to our inner child and allowing our inner child to have that voice. See, it's also connected. We've got to allow our children to grieve so that they can rely on their inner child. As soon as that is disallowed, then that is the splitting of the inner child to the soul self.
Yeah, absolutely.
I believe it starts with us not allowing our children to have that inner child's voice, to continue with that. It's, come on, you're a big boy now. You can deal with this. This is all bad messaging. And I say bad, nothing's good or bad, but I believe that that's not the best messaging for humanity to move forward.
And that is, again, like a collective lesson that, men need emotion. They need to have that expression. They need to be able to connect emotionally to the people around them. And that's why, women can or be such a healing outlet for men, because usually with the men, when they're one-on-one with their women, that's when they're able to allow those emotions out a little bit more, hopefully, than they had been in other areas of their life. So,
and vice versa, and for male partners as well, allowing the woman who on a cycle level, a menstrual cycle level. I mean, when females are coming up to that cycle on a monthly basis, the tears just pour out. And then as soon as the flow starts, boom, I'm right. So the emotional energy that's required for the cycle is so intense that the body, as a female, men, this is why women get emotional. And if you say they're getting angry, well, there's that layer above the emotional energy. So for a woman, the body is set up so that once a month, a little bit of grief can be poured out of the system. But if you're shutting that down or it's manifesting as anger, then that's probably something to be looked at as a female. And so men need to probably understand that a little better as a collective. And the feminine energy could encourage their partner, their masculine, or what have you, when it's all diverse here, the sacred masculine partner to release, to give them a safe place, to release that energy. And therefore, once a young man, a young boy sees that dad is in the crying space, having time to process. I mean, what a beautiful world we could all have.
So true. And I just want to share with all of you one of the reasons why this was such an important topic at this time, because Christmas can really bring on all of these old patterns and old feelings and grief. And it's such a, it's a special time because we're all given an opportunity to go deep inside and, rely on those reserves and get in touch with those emotions. Even my dad, he died on December 17th. So it was so close to Christmas that, for years now, every time Christmas is coming, I get that heavy feeling of those emotions. And sometimes I don't recognize because I don't realize the dates. But it usually starts about 6 weeks before, like, so in November, usually start, and then as the date gets closer. And that's the other thing too, is recognizing that grief has cycles. So, if you had a severe loss at a certain time of year, when you start working through that, you might notice that that anniversary, before the anniversary, you might start having a rehashing of some of these feelings as they're starting to, it's not about, it's not about not processing. It's not that you didn't process at all. It's just, the pattern. We work in patterns. Our minds work in patterns. It likes patterns. So when there's a deep trauma in the pattern, you're gonna feel it again, until there's nothing left. But I mean, I'm 7 years into it, and it still gets a little bit wonky around that time. So.
Yeah, the intuitive body is in action, whether your intellect is or not. I mean, Christmas for me, I've had Christmases on my own. It seemed every Christmas was very uncomfortable with the family. I'm going to tell a little story. Before I was 6, I was a month away from being 6. It was Christmas. And I got up very early. I had a sister that was 3 years younger than me, and another sister just born then. And I got up very early, and I believed in Santa. And I went through the big Santa bags, and I swapped the colours that suited myself with what was being given. And then Mum and Dad got up, and that's not yours. That's not yours. That's not yours. I said, yes, it is. Santa brought it for me. And I said, how do you know, Mum? And she goes, because I got up to feed the baby in the middle of the night, and I had a look, and that's not what was in your bag. So it all got swapped back, and I had a little swimming ring, and I went out to the swimming pool to have a swim. I came back in, this is Christmas morning, I came back in, and there was a note from Santa saying that I was a very naughty girl for doing that, very selfish of me. And Santa's not happy with me, and he's taken my presents. So he took all my presents. That night, this is a sad story. That night we went to church, and I got home, and there was a note from Jesus. And I, lucky girl, Santa and Jesus, I didn't think of it. And my presents were returned. But there was this very shaming letter, how Jesus was very disappointed in me, and blah, 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 blah. Well, that was that. But the real trigger and pain was set up when I was in a teenager and 20s, because every Christmas, my mother with grog in her would tell all the people at the table, what a bad person I was, because I did that at 5 years of age. And I think that energy of that 5-year-old Christmas and having my presents gone all day when everybody else had their presents, I mean, I'm feeling it in the stomach. Do you know what I mean? So that's just a little story about Christmas. I think the more painful issue was my parents telling everybody when I was a young adult,
Then it
because they was continued shaming. And then in my early 20s, late 20s, 28, I was in Sydney. They were all meeting up at my sister's house on a coastal town, and I got a phone call that said, oh, her husband doesn't want you at Christmas. So I had to spend Christmas on my own that day. And I've only recently found out that he never said that. He never said I didn't want Monique to come for Christmas. I only found that out two years or so ago. So there's little things that happen to us, and I soldiered on. I didn't feel any of the grief then. This is survival. We are here to survive as well as vulnerable humans. So that grief of different situations that can go down at Christmas can be the underlying energy of why when Christmas comes, it's, oh God, I hate Christmas, which many people say. I hate Christmas, and
talking about cycles, the very interesting thing that comes to my mind as you're telling me this story is that so that happened at 5. I can almost guarantee you something happened again at 14 and 23 and 32. And it's funny because when I work with people, it's like you find these patterns. See, in our childhood, it's a very feminine imprint. So a lot of times that's where the emotion gets imprinted. And then we'll see the masculine part of it gets imprinted during teen years. And then when we get into our 20s, now they're both operating, it's the two. So then we will relive and it binds the masculine to the feminine. So the masculine is the thinking and the feminine is the emotion. So oftentimes you'll see those patterns running straight through the timeline.
That's a really good point. That is a fabulous point because, I left home at 16. I had to get away from the control. But I think I became my masculine then. And the feminine was like, see you later, alligator. I'm here to survive. People would even say you're a survivor, but I don't want to be a survivor anymore. I want to be a thriver. Exactly. That's what we come here for, is to thrive as beautiful, loved soul human beings, and it's these little notches along the way that grow us, which is beautiful. So I guess for my summing up, grief is a beautiful part of our lives.
It truly is. Yeah.
It's a beautiful part of our lives, and people who have felt the most grief have had the most opportunity to heal and to get on to the other side of that and to thrive.
Absolutely. I can't agree more. I think that it's a powerful tool in our learning and growth process that we must really try to embrace it, love it, understand it, so that it can really help us move to this place of thriving.
And give ourselves permission to grieve daily, even if nothing's happened and you've done most of your grief work. Just the next step, the next lesson after a big section of grief work is to allow the little bits to come out on a daily basis, weekly basis, fortnightly basis, monthly basis, whenever it shows its face.
Yeah. And allow. Accept. Love, forgive, all that fun stuff. Yeah. Thank you so much for such a beautiful conversation. I really enjoyed it, and I really hope that if you've been touched by this, that you will subscribe to our channel, Monique's channel and my channel, and hopefully we can help you with some more human emotions. Next time, we're going to be airing in Canada here on January 19th and in Australia to be January 20th. And we're going to be talking about motivation versus inspiration, which is going to be, I think, a really fun talk. And so it's such a great time to talk about it because, I find that the winter time in Canada, that's the time when you start to really get demotivated, don't want to do anything. And, it's just such a January. And then we have all of those New Year's resolutions that we make, and do we keep going with them? And, so. Yeah.
I'm looking forward to that talk. I'm looking forward to that. It's a great way to start our new year in January. But just getting back to the grief, my heart goes out to all of the listeners. And, we very much have compassion and understanding for you. Any comments, pop them in the comment box, and we can help out as much as we can to lead you to any tools that you're requiring as well, or that you think you're needing. We're here to help. But we understand. We totally understand, and we wrap you up in universal love from our hearts, don't we, Linda? Grief is okay. Grief is cool. It should be grief is cool.
It's challenging, but it's good.
Yes, and Maya, you're alive. You're alive. You
That's
are
right.
alive, and you are living a authentic life when you're sitting with your grief. You are authentic. That you can't get any more authentic than that.
That's true.
Not processing grief is not authentic.
Yeah, ignoring it.
Ignoring it, yeah, and distracting yourself from it, because we can all distract ourselves. There's enough distractions on this planet to not have to feel. However, in your and my experience, there's a power greater than ourselves. And if we don't do it ourselves, then the universe will certainly help us.
Oh my goodness, that is not a joke.
Yeah.
So thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful Christmas, and do all your support work. Reach out if you need to. Lots of love and light to all.
Reach out. Love you all. Love you all from Australia. And thank you so much, Linda. Love doing this with you.